The silence in the room was a predator. It stalked the corners, coiled in the shadows beneath the billion-dollar skyline, and its favorite hunting ground was the space between my own two ears. The city outside was a symphony of ambition, of screeching tires and distant sirens, a concrete jungle alive with the relentless pursuit of more. But in the glass cage of my corner office, the only sound was the flatline of a dying dream. The numbers on the holographic display in front of me weren't just numbers. They were vultures, picking apart the carcass of my company, my creation, my very identity. Red. A sea of bleeding red that told a story of failure in the universal language of finance. Each digit was a tombstone for a late night, a sacrificed weekend, a promise I had made to my team, to my family, to myself. They called it a hostile takeover, a sterile corporate term for a public execution. A rival, a man I once considered a peer, was circling, his lawyers like sharks sensing the final, exhausted thrashing of their prey. He didn't just want the company. He wanted to break me. He wanted to stand on the rubble of my life's work and declare himself king. The world outside saw the myth of the founder, the visionary, the genius, the unstoppable force. They didn't see this. They didn't see the man drowning in the silence, suffocated by the weight of his own creation. The phone on my desk remained dark, a silent testament to the allies who had vanished, the investors who now screened my calls, the friends who offered platitudes from a safe distance. A voice, my own but hollowed out and unrecognizable, whispered from the abyss of my mind. "You flew too close to the sun." It was the anthem of the imposter, the nagging fear that had been my shadow from the very beginning, now stepping into the light to claim its victory. It told me I was a fraud, a gambler who had finally run out of luck. It reminded me of every mistake, every miscalculation, every person I had trusted who now stood on the other side of the battlefield. Have you ever felt that kind of isolation? The kind that is so profound, so absolute, that you begin to doubt your own existence. You look at your hands and wonder if they are yours. You hear your own heartbeat, and it sounds like a drum counting down to your own demise. This wasn't just about business. It was about the fire, the founder's fire, the incandescent rage against the ordinary that had driven me to build something from nothing. It was the belief that I could bend a small piece of the universe to my will. But a fire, untended, burns out. It consumes its fuel and leaves behind nothing but cold, gray ash. And as I stared at the city lights, mocking me with their brilliance, I felt the last ember of my own fire flickering, about to be extinguished by the cold, hard reality of my failure. This is the moment they never show you in the articles, the moment they edit out of the documentaries, the moment of absolute surrender, the moment a man breaks. And I was there. My finger hovered over the button on my desk that would summon my assistant, the button that would begin the process of unconditional surrender. My steel had softened. My will had corroded. The war, it seemed, was already over. But what I didn't know, what the silence and the sharks and the doubt couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the breaking of a man is sometimes the very thing that allows the real warrior to be forged. The end is often a brutal, bloody, and necessary beginning. The journey from that precipice wasn't a single leap of faith. It was a slow, agonizing crawl through the wreckage of my own certainty. For days I existed in a fog. I moved through the motions, spoke the empty words required of a leader pretending to be in control, but inside the hollow ache of defeat was a constant companion. The world, it seemed, had passed its judgment. Julian Croft, the tech prodigy, the visionary who graced magazine covers, was a failure. The narrative was already being written by others, whispered in boardrooms and traded as gossip over expensive lunches. He couldn't handle the pressure. He didn't have what it takes. He was a shooting star who had burned out. Have you ever been so consumed by the opinions of others that their voices become your own inner monologue? Their doubts become your truths. Their judgment becomes your reality. This is the prison of the modern man. We build our identities on the shifting sands of external validation, and when the tide goes out, we are left with nothing. I was nothing. A hollow shell defined by a falling stock price and the triumphant smirk of my rival. My escape, my first step out of that self-imposed prison, came not from a sudden epiphany or a burst of renewed motivation, but from a place of quiet desperation. I found myself one night, long after the city had traded its corporate hum for the lonely wail of sirens, in my father's old study. He had passed years ago, a quiet man of immense, unspoken strength. He wasn't a founder or a CEO. He was an engineer, a man who believed in structure, in principles, in the unyielding laws of physics. He built bridges, things that were meant to withstand storms, things that were designed to bear impossible loads without breaking. My own life felt like a bridge collapsing into a ravine. On his shelf, tucked away behind leather-bound classics and engineering manuals, was a small, worn book. It wasn't a book he had ever told me about. Its cover was simple black leather, unmarked. I opened it, and the pages were filled not with printed text, but with his handwriting. It wasn't a diary. It was a transcription of his thoughts, his meditations on the writings of the ancient Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus. Names I had heard in a long-forgotten philosophy class, but which meant nothing to me. But my father hadn't just copied their words. He had translated them, not from Latin or Greek into English, but from ancient philosophy into a personal code, a blueprint for building a man. The first entry I read stopped my breath. Underlined 3 times were the words, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control, and which have to do with the choices I actually control." Control. The word vibrated in the silent room. My entire life, my entire identity as a founder had been built on the illusion of control. I thought I could control the market. I thought I could control my investors. I thought I could control my team, my technology, my destiny. And now, because I couldn't, I believed I was a failure. The storm was raging, and I was trying to command the wind and the rain, screaming at the hurricane to stop, and in my failure to do so, I had concluded I was weak. My father's notes, his interpretation of this ancient wisdom, framed it differently. He wasn't talking about passivity. He was talking about power, real power, the power to distinguish between the battlefield and the soldier. The market was the battlefield, the economy was the weather. The actions of my rival, the betrayal of my co-founder, the panic of my investors, that was the storm. It was all external. It was all outside of my control. I had been fighting the storm. And you can't win a fight against a storm. You can only endure it. You can only navigate it. You can only control the ship. What were my choices? The words on the page seemed to be asking me directly, what in this very moment do you actually control? I couldn't control the stock market. I couldn't control the narrative being spun in the media. I couldn't erase the betrayal or refill the company's bank accounts with sheer will, but I could control my response. I could control my perception. I could control the integrity with which I faced this crisis. I could control the effort I put in tomorrow morning. I could control whether I surrendered or whether I stood my ground, not because I was guaranteed to win, but because my character demanded it. It felt like the first clean breath of air after being underwater for too long. The panic, the suffocating weight of 1,000 problems beyond my command, began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear focus. The objective wasn't to save the company anymore. That was an outcome, an external. The objective was to act with virtue, with courage, with discipline in the face of this chaos. The objective was to be the man my father had tried to be. A bridge builder, a man who could bear the load, a man who understood that his strength was not in controlling the storm, but in his design, in his foundation, in his mindset of steel. I spent the entire night reading. The words were a revelation. They were not about suppressing emotion, but about understanding it. They were not about passive acceptance, but about active, disciplined choice. It was a warrior's philosophy, forged in the crucible of Roman politics, plagues, and battlefields. And it was speaking to me directly, a 2,000-year-old echo that was more relevant than any business book I had ever read. For the first time in months, as the first gray light of dawn crept over the city, I didn't feel the familiar dread. I felt a flicker, a tiny, defiant spark in the cold ash of my burnout. It wasn't the wild, chaotic blaze of my early ambition. It was something different. It was quiet. It was focused. It was the beginning of a fire that couldn't be extinguished by external forces. It was the pilot light of a furnace ready to forge steel. The war was not over. The war had just begun. But for the first time, I understood what the real battle was. It wasn't for my company. It was for my soul. And the first step was to reclaim the territory of my own mind. The next morning I walked into my office and the air felt different. It was. The air was the same. The predatory silence was still there. The vultures were still circling. I was the one who was different. My focus had shifted from the storm to the ship. I pulled up the org chart, the financial projections, the angry emails from investors. Yesterday, this was a portrait of my failure. Today, it was simply information. It was the weather report. It was the map of the battlefield. The fear was still present, a low hum beneath the surface, but it no longer sat in the command chair. It was now an advisor, a data point, not the dictator of my state of being. My first action was to call a company-wide meeting, an all-hands they call it, a fitting name as I was about to ask every single employee to put their hands into the fire with me. In the past, my leadership style had been about projecting invincibility. I sold a vision of inevitable success, of a future that was bright and guaranteed. It was a performance and I was the lead actor, but the play was a farce and the theater was burning down. Standing before them, I saw the fear in their eyes. They had read the news. They had heard the rumors. They were preparing their resumes, their escape plans. They were expecting me to lie to them, to spin the disaster into a temporary setback, to offer them empty platitudes. The old Julian would have done just that. But the man standing there, holding his father's worn leather journal in his mind, chose a different path. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you that everything is fine," I began. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. "It's not. We are on the verge of losing this company. Our biggest investor has pulled out. Our competition is actively trying to dismantle us and poach our talent. And I know that many of you are afraid. You have families to support, mortgages to pay, and you have every right to be." I let the brutal honesty hang in the air. I made eye contact with people in the front row, in the back row. I didn't offer them a solution. I just offered them the truth. This is a core tenet I was beginning to understand. Face reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. The obstacle is the way. I cannot promise you that we will save this company. I cannot promise you that you will have a job next month. Anyone who makes you a promise like that in a situation like this is not a leader. They are a salesman. And I am done selling. A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the speech they expected. "What I can promise you," I continued, my voice finding a strength I didn't know it had, "is this: I will not surrender. I will not quit. I will be the first one in this office every morning and the last one to leave every night. I will dedicate every ounce of my energy and focus to navigating this storm, but I cannot do it alone. The old plan has failed. The old strategy is obsolete. The world has changed and we must change with it, or we will die." I looked out at their faces. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with something else. Curiosity, intrigue, a flicker of respect. "This is no longer about stock options or a fancy title. This is about whether we choose to be defined by our circumstances or by our response to them. I am asking you to make a choice. For those of you who want to leave, I understand. There will be no judgment. I will give you the best reference I possibly can. But for those of you who stay, you are not staying for the old company. You are staying to build a new one. A tougher, smarter, more resilient one. You are staying to fight. Not for me, but for the person next to you. For the work itself. For the refusal to break when the world is trying to break you. I paused. The fight is here. The choice is yours. I will be in my office. I walked off the stage. I didn't know if anyone would follow. I had stripped away all the false comfort, all the illusions. I had offered them nothing but the brutal truth and a call to shared struggle. I had given them the ultimate choice, a choice that was entirely within their control, the choice to stay and fight or the choice to leave. By empowering them with that choice, I had, paradoxically, begun to regain my own power. Back in my office, the silence was different now. It was no longer a predator. It was a canvas, a space for a new plan to be drawn. I didn't know how many would stay. But as I sat down at my desk, my head of engineering, a brilliant but cynical woman who had questioned my every move for the past year, appeared at my door. She didn't say a word. She just nodded. Then my head of marketing appeared behind her. Then two of my best coders. They didn't offer speeches. They just stood there, a silent statement of their choice. They hadn't chosen to follow me because I promised them victory. They had chosen to follow me because I had finally promised them the truth. I had abandoned the role of the visionary selling a dream and had embraced the role of the commander in the trenches, sharing the same mud, the same risk, the same fight as his soldiers. This was the second principle taking root in my soul. You are not your title. You are not your reputation. You are your actions. And my actions would no longer be dictated by fear, but by a cold, hard, and liberating acceptance of reality. The forging had begun. The days that followed were a blur of controlled chaos. The strategy shifted from broad, ambitious expansion to disciplined, tactical survival. We were no longer a galleon sailing for the new world. We were a lifeboat in a hurricane, and every action had to be focused on one thing: staying afloat. This required a level of ruthlessness I hadn't known I was capable of. We slashed budgets. We abandoned passion projects that were draining resources. We called our clients, not with excuses, but with a starkly honest assessment of our situation and a renewed commitment to delivering value. Some left, but many, surprisingly, stayed. They respected the honesty. They saw the fight in us. Inside me, a similar brutal triage was taking place. My mind had been cluttered with 1,000 anxieties. What would people think of me? What if I lost my house? What if my rival wrote a gloating article about me? These were the passion projects of the ego, and they were draining my will to live. Applying that stoic razor, I began to cut them away. What people thought of me was an external. Their opinions were theirs, not mine. I could not control them, so I let the anxiety go. Losing my house would be painful, an external event tied to the company's failure. But would it destroy me, the core of me? No, I could live in a smaller house. I could rebuild. The fear was worse than the thing itself. This was the practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, a concept I read about in my father's journal. Do not just glance at the worst-case scenario. Stare it in the face. Walk through it in your imagination. See yourself on the other side of it. By doing so, you rob it of its power. Its terror lies in its ambiguity. When you define it, when you map it, it becomes just another problem to be solved. So I did it. I sat in the dark one night and walked through my own personal apocalypse. I saw the company fold. I saw the headlines announcing my failure. I saw myself packing my belongings into boxes, telling my family I had lost everything. I felt the shame, the embarrassment, the grief. I let it wash over me, not fighting it, but observing it. And then I walked further. What would I do the next day? I would wake up. I would still be a father, a husband, a man with a mind and two hands. I would look for a new problem to solve. I would start again. Smaller, perhaps, wiser, definitely. And a strange thing happened. The monster in the dark, the one that had been whispering threats from the shadows of my mind, was revealed to be nothing more than a stray dog, frightening when it barked from the darkness but manageable in the light of day. By confronting the worst, I had liberated myself to pursue the best. The fear of failure was no longer a cage. It was simply a data point. This newfound clarity began to manifest in my leadership. In meetings, I was no longer defensive or desperate. I was calm, clinical. When an executive would bring up a new threat, a new rumor, a new problem, my first question was no longer, "How do we stop this?" It was, "Is this within our control?" If a competitor launched a new feature, we would analyze it, learn from it, but we would not panic. Their actions were their own. Our focus had to be on our product, our customers, our work. That was within our control. If a negative article was published, we would not waste a day crafting the perfect public relations response. The article was out there. The ink was dry. It was an external. Our response was to double down on our work, to let our actions be our rebuttal. This was a radical shift, not just for me, but for the entire culture of the company. The frantic, anxiety-driven energy was replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. We were no longer trying to win the war on 1,000 fronts. We were fighting a guerrilla action, focusing our limited resources on the few key battles we could actually win. We stopped talking about changing the world and started talking about surviving the month. And in that brutal, narrow focus, we found a strange kind of freedom. Do you see the paradox here? By surrendering the illusion of control over everything, we gained true control over the things that mattered. By accepting the possibility of failure, we were freed to actually fight to win. This is the steel of the Stoic mindset. It is not an absence of feeling. It is not a detachment from reality. It is a radical engagement with reality, stripped of the ego's delusions and the mind's fears. It's the understanding that the universe is going to do what it's going to do. The waves will crash. The storms will rage. Your job is not to command the sea. Your job is to build a boat that is worthy of it, and to be a captain that is worthy of the boat. My rival, his name was Marcus Thorne, saw this shift and it confused him. He was a man who thrived on ego, on psychological warfare. He expected me to lash out, to make rash decisions based on fear and pride. He kept leaking negative information to the press, expecting it to destabilize us. But we didn't react. We just kept working. He poached a key sales executive, expecting it to cripple our revenue stream. We promoted a junior salesperson who was hungrier and more creative, and our numbers actually stabilized. He was playing chess with a man who was no longer on the board. He was trying to win a psychological game, but I had abandoned the stadium. My fight was internal. The true test, however, was yet to come. It wasn't a market crash or a technological failure. It was a betrayal far deeper, far more personal, and it would challenge this newfound philosophy to its very core. It would force me to confront the hardest principle of all, not just to accept fate, but to love it. The betrayal came from a man I considered a brother, David, my co-founder and chief technology officer. We had started this company in a garage, fueled by cheap pizza and an unbreakable belief in each other. He was the architect of our technology, the quiet genius to my loud vision. While I was on magazine covers, he was in the server room making the dream a reality. I trusted him implicitly. His name was the only one besides my own that I had never doubted. The discovery was accidental, a stray email thread I was copied on by mistake. It was a conversation between David and Marcus Thorne, my brother and my enemy. The thread went back months. David had been feeding Thorne information, our product roadmap, our financial weaknesses, our internal morale issues. He hadn't just been a passive source. He had been an active strategist, advising Thorne on the most effective ways to apply pressure, where to strike to cause the most damage. He had handcrafted the daggers that Thorne had been plunging into our back. Reading those emails, the world went silent. The cold, disciplined focus I had cultivated over the past weeks shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't an external market force. This wasn't an anonymous competitor. This was David, the man whose child was my godson, the man I had sat with in the hospital when his father died. The stoic principles, the clear-eyed logic, it all evaporated in a hot, white flash of pure rage. The instinct was primal. I wanted to destroy him. Not his career, him. I wanted to walk into his office and see the look on his face when he knew that I knew. I wanted to expose him to the entire company, to the world. I wanted to ruin him. For an hour I let that rage consume me. It was a fire, but not the founder's fire of creation. It was the fire of pure, unadulterated destruction. My mind raced with scenarios of revenge, each more satisfying than the last. But then, a quieter voice, the one I had been painstakingly cultivating, began to whisper through the inferno. His actions are his own. They are not under your control. It was a pathetic whisper at first, easily drowned out by the roar of my anger. But it persisted. You cannot control his betrayal. You can only control your response. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I forced myself to sit, to breathe, to not act. I pulled out a piece of paper, and at the top I wrote the words from my father's journal, the words of Marcus Aurelius. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. What would be the typical response? An emotional outburst, a public shaming, a bitter lawsuit that would drain our remaining resources and make lawyers rich. It would be a drama fueled by ego and hurt. It would be exactly what Marcus Thorne would do. It would be exactly what he expected me to do. My rage, my predictable, emotional reaction, was the final piece of their plan. It would be the thing that would make me look unstable, emotional, unfit to lead, and would cause the last of my loyal team to finally abandon ship. My emotional breakdown was the checkmate they had been playing for. And in that moment of clarity, amidst the wreckage of my trust, I saw the path. To be unlike them. To respond not with passion but with purpose. To use their own weapon, their own betrayal, not as a reason to crumble but as a tool to win. The principle my father had struggled with the most, the one with the most scribbled notes and question marks next to it, was amor fati. Love your fate. Not just accept it, not just endure it, but love it. Love the obstacle. Love the betrayal. See it as a necessary, essential part of your journey. See the poison as the medicine. How could I love this? This sickening, heartbreaking betrayal. The journal's logic was relentless. This event, this terrible thing, had been given to you. It is now a part of your story. You cannot change it. You can either let it be the thing that broke you, or you can choose to see it as the thing that made you. The fire that forges the steel is not a gentle warmth. It is a brutal, searing heat. This was my fire. This betrayal was the ultimate test. Could I use it? Could I transform it from a wound into a weapon? The rage began to cool, not into forgiveness, but into something far more dangerous, a cold, crystalline resolve. My focus was no longer on David's betrayal, but on its utility. He had shown me their entire hand. He had revealed their strategy, their assumptions, their endgame. He thought he was handing them the keys to the kingdom, but in his arrogance, he had also handed me the blueprint to their entire assault. I did not confront him. I did not fire him. I did nothing. I went to work the next day and greeted him with the same professional courtesy as always, the hardest acting of my life. I had to become a fortress, my face a stoic mask that betrayed none of the war raging within me. I needed him to stay in place, to keep feeding them information, but now the information he would be feeding them would be my own. We had been working on a new platform, a radical pivot for our company, codenamed Prometheus. It was our last-ditch effort, the one true secret we had left. David, as CTO, knew every detail. The plan had been to launch it in 6 months after a long, drawn-out beta testing period. But Thorne's assault was designed to bleed us out long before then. My new plan was simple. We would use David as a conduit for disinformation. We would leak a false timeline for Prometheus, making it seem like it was a year away, a desperate, half-baked idea. We would let him feed Thorne documents that showed us focusing on our old, failing product lines. We would make it appear that we were shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. We would encourage Thorne's belief that we were on the verge of total collapse, lulling the shark into a state of complacent arrogance. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, my loyal team and I went into a state of total war. We moved the real Prometheus project to a secret off-site location. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by a silent, burning intensity. The betrayal had a strange effect on the team. When I selectively and privately informed the key leaders of the situation, it didn't break their morale. It galvanized it. The fight was no longer abstract, no longer about market share. It was personal. We had an enemy with a face. We had a traitor in our midst. And we were united by a single, focused purpose: to make them pay for their hubris, not with loud revenge, but with quiet, devastating success. Does this sound cold, calculating? Good. The world of business, the world of real stakes, is not a polite debate club. It is a war. And when someone has declared war on you, to respond with naivete is not virtuous. It is suicide. The Stoic is not a passive victim. He is a clear-eyed warrior who uses the terrain of reality to his advantage. He does not cry about the ambush. He uses the ambush to trap his attackers. For weeks, I lived a double life. In the office, I played the part of the beaten CEO, going through the motions, allowing David to see my apparent despair. I watched him in meetings, saw the pity in his eyes, a pity that masked his contempt. And I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the cold focus of a craftsman honing his tool. He was a piece on the board, and his predictable treachery was now my greatest asset. This is the power of loving your fate. It is the ultimate alchemy. It transforms the worst poison into the most potent fuel. It takes the very thing that was meant to destroy you and makes it the cornerstone of your victory. Have you ever faced a setback so crushing you thought it was the end? A betrayal that tore you apart? A failure that defined you? I am asking you to consider a radical idea. What if that event, that very thing you despise, is the greatest gift you have ever been given? What if it is the precise and necessary ingredient to forge you into the person you were meant to become? It is a difficult question, but the answer, should you be brave enough to embrace it, will change the very fabric of your reality. The final weeks before the launch of Prometheus were the quietest of my life. The frantic energy of the startup hustle was gone, replaced by the silent, coordinated intensity of a special forces unit preparing for a mission. Every team member knew their role. Every line of code, every marketing asset, every server configuration was executed with a precision born of necessity. There was no room for ego, no time for debate. There was only the mission. Externally, the narrative of our demise had reached its crescendo. Marcus Thorne, confident in the information David was feeding him, was preparing his final move. He had filed the official paperwork for the hostile takeover, setting a date for the shareholder vote. He gave interviews to financial news outlets, speaking of our company in the past tense, outlining his vision for absorbing our remnants. He was a victor, giving his triumphant speech before the final battle had even been fought. He believed the war was over. He couldn't have been more wrong. I continued to play my part, the broken founder going through the motions of a desperate, futile defense. I authorized legal challenges I knew we would lose. I made public statements that sounded weak and reactive. Every move was designed to reinforce the fiction David was selling him, that I was cornered, blind, and finished. The hardest part was the silence, not saying anything when my life's work was being publicly dismantled, not reacting when my name was being dragged through the mud. Every instinct screamed at me to fight back, to defend my honor, but the stoic discipline held firm. The ego is a loud, foolish advisor. The warrior knows the value of silence, of letting the enemy underestimate him until the final, decisive moment. The night before the launch, I didn't sleep, not from anxiety but from a profound and serene sense of clarity. I walked through the empty, secret office where the Prometheus team had been working. The whiteboards were covered in a beautiful, chaotic web of diagrams and formulas. The air hummed with the silent energy of 1,000 sleepless nights. These people hadn't stayed for money or for glory. They had stayed for the fight itself. They had faced the abyss with me and chosen not to blink. Whatever happened tomorrow, we had already won the battle that mattered. We had held the line within ourselves. That night I opened my father's journal one last time. I didn't read the words of the ancients. I looked at his handwriting, at the steadfast, practical script of an engineer, a man who built things to last. He had never faced a corporate takeover, but he had faced storms, structural failures, the unyielding forces of nature that test a man's work. And he understood that the most important structure you will ever build is your own character. The foundation is your principles. The load-bearing walls are your discipline. The steel in the concrete is your will. The next morning was the shareholder meeting. The room was a sterile, soulless space in a downtown hotel, filled with suits who smelled of money and cynicism. Marcus Thorne sat at the front, looking smug and magnanimous, a king holding court. My team, the few loyalists who knew the real plan, were scattered throughout the room, their faces unreadable masks of calm. David sat near the front, looking somber, playing the part of the loyal CTO going down with the ship. The proceedings began. Thorne's lawyers presented their case. It was a methodical, brutal dissection of our company's failures, all true, all meticulously documented thanks to their inside source. They painted a picture of a company in a death spiral, led by a founder who was out of his depth. My own lawyer offered a weak, pre-scripted defense. It was a piece of theater designed for an audience of one, Marcus Thorne. I watched him, and I could see him relaxing, the tension leaving his shoulders. He believed he had won. When it was my turn to speak, I walked slowly to the podium. I looked out at the faces in the room. I saw the pity, the condescension, the boredom. I looked at Marcus Thorne and I made direct eye contact. I saw the triumphant gleam in his eyes. Then I looked at David, and for a fraction of a second I saw a flicker of something, shame, perhaps, or just the discomfort of a man watching the final act of his own treachery. "Good morning," I began, my voice even and calm. "I would like to thank Mr. Thorne and his team for their thorough analysis of our company's recent performance. They have painted a picture of a company on the brink of collapse, and on the surface, based on the information they have, their conclusion is not entirely unreasonable." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the fighting speech of a cornered animal. It sounded like a concession. Thorne smiled. "However," I continued, a slight edge creeping into my voice, "their analysis is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. They believe they are analyzing a company that builds X," I said, naming our old legacy product. "And that company, I will admit, is failing. In fact, that company is already dead. We killed it ourselves about 8 weeks ago." The smile on Thorne's face froze. He exchanged a confused look with his lawyers. You see, while Mr. Thorne was busy reading our obituary, we were busy being reborn. While he was focused on our past, we were building our future, a future he knows nothing about. I clicked a button on the remote in my hand. The large screens behind me, which had been showing boring financial charts, flickered to life. The word Prometheus appeared in stark white letters on a black background. For the past 2 months, my team has been in a state of total, focused creation. We have built a new platform from the ground up, one that doesn't just improve on our old technology, it makes it obsolete. It makes our competitors' technology obsolete. I clicked the button again. A live demo of the platform began to play, not a simulation, a live, functioning product. The room was silent, the only sound the crisp, professional narration of the demo video. I could feel the shift in the room's energy. The boredom was replaced by intrigue. The pity was replaced by shock. I laid it all out, the technology, the business model, the new clients we had secretly signed on in the past week, the patents that had been granted just yesterday. It was an overwhelming, undeniable display of strategic and creative dominance. We hadn't just survived, we had evolved. Then I turned to the final slide. It was a single, stark sentence. This project was developed under conditions of extreme operational security to guard against acts of corporate espionage. I paused and let my eyes drift to David. His face had gone pale, the color of ash. He was staring at the screen, then at me, the comprehension dawning in his eyes. He understood. He had not been the betrayer. He had been the tool, the pawn. I looked back at Marcus Thorne. The smugness was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He was a general who had meticulously planned an invasion, only to find the enemy army waiting for him on a different continent, armed with weapons he didn't know existed. He had been fighting a ghost. The company you are trying to acquire for pennies on the dollar no longer exists, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. In its place stands a new entity, with new technology, a new strategy, and a renewed purpose. The takeover you have proposed is based on false, outdated, and I might add, illegally obtained information. It is irrelevant. I turned to the shareholders. We will, of course, be launching a full investigation into the source of the leaks that nearly destroyed us, and we will pursue all legal remedies. But that is a matter for another day. Today is about the future. Today, we are withdrawing our company from this vote. We are rejecting Mr. Thorne's offer, and we are refiling our valuation this afternoon based on the reality of our new position. I finished my speech. The silence that followed was not the predatory silence of my office. It was the stunned silence of a battlefield after a decisive, unexpected victory. My team, scattered in the crowd, began a slow, deliberate applause. It spread through the room, not from the suits and the investors, but from the few employees, the true believers who had been there. Marcus Thorne sat frozen, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. His gambit, built on arrogance and deceit, had crumbled to dust. David was gone. He had slipped out of the room unnoticed during the presentation, a ghost vanishing from the scene of his own irrelevance. I didn't feel a rush of euphoria. I didn't feel the need to gloat. As I walked away from the podium, I felt a deep, quiet calm. The Stoics called it apatheia, not an absence of emotion, but a state of tranquility, free from the disturbance of violent passions. The external battle had been won, but that was just a byproduct. The real victory had been 1 month ago in the dark, silent office when I chose to fight a different kind of war. The war against my own fear, my own ego, my own despair. The journey was far from over. Rebuilding the company and myself would be a long, arduous process, but the foundation was now secure. It had been tested by the fiercest fire imaginable, and it had held. The founder's fire had not been extinguished. It had been contained, controlled, and focused by a mindset of steel. It no longer burned wild and chaotic. It now burned with the clean, intense, and unyielding heat of a forge, ready to shape whatever came next. The world outside sees the victory, the triumphant comeback, the headline-grabbing success. They construct a narrative of genius, of a master plan perfectly executed. But you know the truth. You know it wasn't born of a single brilliant idea, but from 1,000 quiet choices. The choice to get out of bed when despair tells you to stay down. The choice to focus on what you can control when chaos rages around you. The choice to face the worst-case scenario and strip it of its power. The choice to see a crippling betrayal not as an end, but as a necessary tool for your own evolution. This is the path. It's not a secret whispered among billionaires. It's a timeless philosophy available to anyone with the courage to walk it. It is the understanding that the obstacle in the path is not an obstacle. It is the path. The challenge you are facing right now, the one that keeps you up at night, the one you think might break you, that is your fire. That is your crucible. You have two choices. You can let it consume you and leave you as ash. Or you can step into it, endure the heat, and allow it to burn away everything that is weak, everything that is non-essential, everything that is not you. So look at your life. Look at your challenges. Stop seeing them as burdens. Stop cursing your fate. Instead, ask the question, how can I use this? How can this obstacle serve me? How can this pain become my power? This is the alchemy of the human will. This is the founder's fire, not just for starting companies, but for building a life of meaning, of purpose, of unconquerable inner strength. The world will always provide the fire. It is your job, your duty, and your privilege to provide the steel. The story of Julian Croft is not my story. It's a reflection of the war you are fighting every single day. The war for your own mind. It's a conflict waged in the silence of your own thoughts, in the choices you make when no one is watching. What I've shared with you are not just concepts, they are weapons. The discipline to separate what you can control from what you cannot is your shield. It deflects the arrows of anxiety, despair, and the opinions of others. The practice of premeditating on negative outcomes is your reconnaissance. It maps the territory of fear, robbing ambushes of their surprise and monsters of their shadows. The radical acceptance, the love of your fate, is your ultimate weapon. It is the power to turn the enemy's strength into your own, to transform poison into power. Think about the central challenge in your life right now, the one that feels insurmountable. Is it a financial struggle, a betrayal from someone you trusted, a career that feels like a dead end, a fear of failure that paralyzes you? Now I want you to stop running from it. Stop distracting yourself from it. Stop complaining about it. I want you to look at it directly and for the first time see it not as a curse but as a curriculum. It is your personal trainer, designed specifically to target your weakest points. The universe is not punishing you. It is preparing you. Your task is to become a student of your own suffering. Dissect it. Understand its nature. Is the pain coming from the event itself or from your judgment about the event? Is the fear based on a real and present danger or a story you are telling yourself about the future? Like a warrior studying his opponent, you must study your own mind, your own reactions. You must become a master of your internal state. This is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice. It is a war of attrition fought every morning when you wake up. You must choose discipline over distraction. You must choose courage over comfort. You must choose action over apathy. Every time you make that choice, you are casting another vote for the person you want to become. You are adding another layer to your armor. You are tempering the steel of your will. We are building a community here, a tribe of individuals who have chosen to walk this harder path. We are not interested in shallow motivation or empty affirmations. We are interested in strength, in resilience, in the kind of power that is forged, not given. The journey is long, and you do not have to walk it alone. I want you to do two things. First, subscribe to this channel, join us. Become part of this digital phalanx, a shield wall of minds committed to this philosophy. Second, I want you to go down to the comments and I want you to name your obstacle, not in detail, not with a story of victimhood, but with a single word or phrase. Name the dragon you are choosing to fight: debt, betrayal, fear, procrastination. By writing it down, you are dragging it out of the shadows and into the light. You are declaring your intention to face it, not as a victim, but as a warrior. Read the comments of your brothers and sisters in this fight. See that you are not alone. Your struggle is the human struggle. This is not just another video. This is a call to arms. Your life is your enterprise. You are its founder. You are its CEO. And it is under a hostile takeover from mediocrity, from fear, from the soft whispers of a culture that tells you to be comfortable, to be safe, to be small. Today is the day you stop selling your shares. Today is the day you fight back. Go into the fire, find your steel, and build an empire within.